welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne, and I'm your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. In this episode, I'm talking to Sophie Carr about her photography career and how her passion for the wonderful landscapes of Iceland have shaped it. Sophie is a travel and landscape photographer based in southwest London, specialising in landscape photography of Arctic and sub-Antarctic areas. She's travelled extensively and particularly loves icy, remote, mountainous and volcanic areas, such as Chile and Iceland. Her passion for Iceland is reflected in the body of work she has amassed over the multiple trips she's made to this magical place. The unique landscapes and weather of this land have cemented their place in her heart, and it shows in her work. We discuss how her early visits shaped her love of the landscape and the ways in which her work is a reflection of the place she loves so much. We also touch on some of her work closer to home and many other topics. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Sophie. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
Thank you. Good, thank you. It's been a beautiful day here in London. The weather's picked up a bit, so it's lovely and spring-like here with lots of nice flowers.
Nice. Yeah. It's just started raining here, so for those listening, if you hear a roar in the background, that's my tin roof getting hammered by rain. I've seen quite a bit of your work for a while, and quite happy that you've agreed to come on the show. Let's start with what got you started in photography and landscape photography in particular.
Well, I've always liked taking photos. I'm 51 now, so I've had reasonably long life, and I started taking photos years ago as a kid with a cheapish camera back in the film days. I wasn't ever particularly good, and I then did a lot of traveling. I did 2 long round the world trips in 2000 and 2004, including stopping off in Australia.
Nice.
And the first trip, I think I hadn't had a DSLR by that point. So I was just using a point and shoot, and I was quite disappointed with my photos when I got home. I had quite a lot of, I was still in film days, so I got all my films developed and they're all a bit disappointing. By the time I went back on the second one, I'd got my first kind of entry level digital DSLR, and I'd also been on a couple of photography courses just to sort of learn about the technical side of things, which I didn't really know about before, and kind of I think my interest really got piqued probably towards the end of maybe 2008 2009. I work as an accountant in banking, and actually looking in kind of IT areas. And I started walking part of the way to work as part of my commute along the River Thames, which is obviously a nice big river that goes through the centre of London.
Yep.
And I had a point and shoot, like a little Canon S90 that I used to take with me. And I'd have to kind of build in extra time for my walk to make sure I could take photos and still get to work on time.
Yeah.
I didn't take my SLR with me very often, but I did take my point and shoot, and I just started taking photos all the time along the river. I started uploading them on Flickr, I think, in about 2009, and joined a few groups, and it actually just really encouraged me to take more and to learn more. And then I guess I didn't really start doing it seriously until a couple of years later, when I got when I first went to Iceland. I mean, I've always taken lots of photos before then, and I was getting to a reasonable standard probably in sort of 2010. But I did my first solo photo trip to Iceland in March 2010, so exactly 10 years ago. And since then, it's just I guess Iceland was my muse, and I mean that's the main thing I take photos of now, and the main place I go to regularly. So the landscape is just something that's always just I've always loved mountainous areas. Got taken up mountains as kids to the Alps, and I just think mountains are just stunning. So I also went to Antarctica on both trips in 2000 and 2004, and I think I kind of fell in love with icy mountainous places then. And then Iceland is like a small version of that, but a lot closer to home and a lot cheaper to get to.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So in the last 10 years, I've managed to rack up 20 trips to Iceland.
Wow.
I've kind of managed to combine it with having a full-time job in finance, although my full-time job hasn't been very full-time because I generally do contracting. So I do a couple of years and then have some time off. And in those times off, I had one recently and during the middle of the pandemic where I actually had 2-month-long trips to Iceland.
Oh, wow.
Which was a really, a bit of a privilege to be able to spend that long there.
Yeah, definitely. And quite, I guess, quite different to most people's experience or recent experience.
Yeah. I mean, I went to Iceland just before the pandemic hit, so February 2020, and it was actually one of my best trips. I had amazing stormy weather and the skies and seas were just fantastic. And I got home and then the pandemic started and didn't know when I was next going to be able to go back. But I ended up going back when travel restrictions were lifted that summer, just for a couple of weeks while I was still working. And then my contract came to an end at the end of October 2020. And instead of looking for another job, I thought, well, I'm gonna go back to Iceland for a big trip while there's no one else there.
Yeah.
I think I've been once before in November, and it's
got all the flosses to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So I just I planned to go for 5 weeks, and 2 days after I left my job, I was on a plane on my own, husband at home looking after the dog, and off I went to Iceland to experience the winter with pretty much no other tourists in the country. So it was quite a weird experience. There was still some COVID restrictions. I had to quarantine for 5 days on arrival, but I knew of a perfect little hut on the beach that I could stay in for not very much money, and that was like the perfect place to sit out 5 days, because I was allowed to go for walks and do photography, just not get in the car and go anywhere. Anyway, it was a fantastic experience. I went all the way around Iceland, which I hadn't actually done on any of the previous trips, because I usually go for about 10 days, and that's enough to kind of do along the south coast and back. And it is long enough to go around the whole island, but it's a bit of a push. Yeah. So I ended up extending the trip for 2 weeks. So I ended up spending 7 weeks there in total. Wow. And going to the west, going up to the West Fjords, which is just a crazy thing to do in the winter. By this point, it was, early December, about 3 or 4 hours daylight a day. Lots of roads closed all the time because of snow, but I managed to not have any massive events and not get stuck anywhere. So it was a fantastic experience. Amazing. And then I managed to get another 2 months last summer, because I still hadn't got a job. I wasn't really looking. I thought I'd take a year off while the COVID thing was going on. We couldn't travel anywhere for the first 4 months or 5 months from the UK. So when the travel restrictions were lifted and I got my second vaccination off, I went back to Iceland. Again, I planned for 6 weeks, but I ended up staying 9. And my husband actually was able to come and join me for the last sort of 3 or 4. So we had a bit of a kind of a proper holiday as well. So nice. Which was probably a bit less than the photography.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about why Iceland and why so many repeats, but I'll come back to that. But I thought I'd just explore the education side of things. You mentioned that you did a couple of courses early on.
Yeah.
So I guess just talk to me a little bit about how you've educated yourself and how you've used education to sort of develop your photographic style, etc.
So as I said, I did these big long round the world trips, and the first one I came back in like October or the summer of 2001, and I got a job in a bank just after that. And there was and as I said, I was a bit disappointed in my photos. I never, they were always not quite sharp enough. That was probably the problem, just not quite sharp enough, and just a bit disappointing. That the composition, I think I was always reasonably okay with, but the actual technique was not brilliant. And there was a college opposite my office that has like a night school. that offers, all sorts of language courses. I think I did a Spanish course there once as well, and it had just a 6-week photography course, 2 hours once a week. So me and a friend signed up and went along, and each week we had an assignment of taking a roll of film and getting it developed. So one week was, on shallow depth of field, and different techniques. And I loved exploring the different, things that it was, photography was capable of, which I hadn't had really any clue about before.
Sure.
I was actually quite lucky in that one of the weekends I had a business trip to Amsterdam. I worked for a Dutch bank, so I was able to go a day early and take photos in Amsterdam, which was like a nice assignment. One of the weekends was actually my first ever trip to Iceland, so I was able to, and I think we were doing portraits. So I went with a friend and was able to practice doing portraits in, Icelandic autumn weather, which was great. So I kind of learned quite a lot. Learned how to use the camera I'd bought, and then I did another course with the same tutor about a year later, which was more about things like flash photography and a bit more on the techniques. And apart from that, I haven't had any training. So from then on, I think most of my knowledge I learned I went through a phase for quite a few years of buying photography magazines and reading the techniques in there. More probably that than online at that point. So this was probably, 2006 to 2010.
There weren't quite so many vloggers and
no, exactly, and
reels out there. Yeah.
I mean, I've always been quite big of using online stuff, but as you say, there weren't the social media networks and things around really to find it quite as easily. I mean, YouTube obviously has been around for a while, but I actually find personally, I find it easier to read things than to listen or watch things sometimes. So I spend a lot of time on Twitter where I'm basically reading, and if I listen to things, I'd actually rather watch a video and read the subtitles on it.
Okay.
It's kind of strange. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I talk with people at work all the time, and I just don't really want to talk the rest of it.
I think it's interesting because different people learn different ways.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I think, the poor old education systems, the UK one, I'm familiar with that as well because my wife's from the UK, and the Australian one, at least, they tend to teach you in pretty much the same way rather than, and I know I'm probably going to get a bunch of teachers now hitting me and saying, no, that's not the case.
It's been interesting with my different people have different ideas of what works for them, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. And if you're stuck in a certain, or the education system is stuck in a certain way of teaching, then you're going to struggle if that's not your style of learning, I think.
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, and I guess with the magazines as well, it meant that I could just take it at my own pace and learn. So there was. I've definitely noticed, and I've noticed other photographers go through a kind of. It's almost like a phase of things they get interested in along their journey. So I think the first thing was I bought a wide-angle lens. So it was like when I got my wide angle, it was like, I've got this amazing new view.
Yeah.
Then I got into filters, like graduated ND filter and a few like long, bigger ND filters for doing long exposure.
Yeah.
Then I bought a macro lens and I got really into doing macro.
Yeah.
And then it was like I've kind of gone through this phase, and I've definitely seen other photographers do it. And then I realized that actually now I rarely use the macro lens. I rarely use my wide angle, only for a few certain views. Now I've kind of moved on to, I've got a 100 to 400 millimeter lens. That's the one I use probably the most.
Okay.
And I realized that what I really like taking photos of are landscapes, but kind of mostly kind of zoomed in to the details.
Yeah, right.
And it may be a phase I'm going through, and maybe I'll come out the other side and go back to, super wide angle again or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. A lot of photographers go through different phases, and to me, it's just part of exploring the art. It's really about you look at something and you go, oh, I'd like to give that a try. And so you do,
Yeah.
and you get into it for a while, and then you decide, okay, well, I'm going to keep it and keep it as part of my kit bag, or I'm going to throw it away because, at the end of the day, it's not really satisfying my, my urges,
Yeah. And I stupidly bought with this quite fancy Canon macro a couple of years ago, or a few years ago now, thinking, oh yeah, that would be really good fun for doing these little tiny insects and things. But my eyesight has deteriorated so much in the last few years that it's actually really, I just find it a real struggle. I can't really see properly to do it. So I think I might actually sell that lens because it's a bit, I don't really ever use it. And I've got extension tubes if I want to have a kind of quick, easy solution to get a bit of macro.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
But yeah, so I think the magazines were probably the thing that helped. And also, yeah, I spent quite a lot of time for a few years on Flickr, and I'd post quite a lot of photos, and a lot of it is just, a kind of pat on the back to each other. So, oh, a lovely photo. But I did also, I think it was a helpful site because I had camera settings. So I was able to kind of see what other people were posting and look at their settings and learn a bit from that as well. And then I guess in the last few years, social media's just taken off massively. And I probably haven't really learned a great deal in the last few years, to be honest. But most of the things I do are probably second nature now rather than having to think about.
Yeah, probably more extensions of what you've already learned. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or more applications, I guess, of what you've already learned. So
I've probably become a bit more experimental, I think, maybe over the last couple of years. Like I take a lot of handheld long exposures of waves, which aren't necessarily things that everybody would like to do themselves or enjoy looking at, but I really like doing them. I find it quite a kind of fascinating subject matter, and you get some interesting effects.
Interesting technical challenge as well. I was talking to who was it? William Patino the other day, and he was talking about his handheld long exposures, waterfalls and wherever else, and it's not something that I've really tried. I'm still tied to my tripod a bit, but
well, it's actually fun. It's funny because in Iceland it's sometimes actually easier because getting your thing on the tripod and trying to take photos of waves is, on a tripod is actually more challenging than just having it and in your hand, taking it, whatever you see. And the wind might rock you around a bit, but it can add some effects. And so sometimes it's almost, maybe I discovered it by laziness of thinking of, not using the tripod and thinking, oh, I'll see what comes out. And so I guess I had seen a few ICM photographers previously. And maybe been inspired by that.
Yeah, okay. So you're using DSLR or a mirrorless for that?
Yeah, so I haven't yet moved on to mirrorless. I've kind of invested in the lenses. So I use a Canon 5D Mark IV. I had a Canon D Mark III before that, which is my spare. And I guess by the time when the mirrorless were coming out was about the same time that the 5D Mark IV came out, and my 5D Mark III had a bit of water damage, so it was a bit touch and go whether it would last a trip to Iceland. So I decided just to replace it with the Mark IV, and then mirrorless, the ones that I might go to move to now hadn't come out at that point; they were still slightly new. So I thought, well, I'll just go with the SLR. So I'm still on that. And then I've got some nice lenses, which I'd have to obviously use or either replace or use an adapter. So
good friend of mine and friend of the podcast, Gary Graham, he's moved to the R3. He does a lot of motorsports photography. Okay. So the R3 sort of seems fairly well built for that. But he's been a long time 1D and 5DX, 5D Mark IV and so forth user. And he said that it's about a $200, so about £100 adapter he said
works fine with the lenses. Yeah.
Straight out, I think does the job. So
I think that will be my next move. I can't really justify it
just
yet. I didn't buy the other one that long ago, and although my shutter count's probably massive, having had 2-month long trips, so
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I'm definitely getting use out of it.
So, tell me about Iceland. What was it other than just? I mean, sure, everyone knows the stunning beauty of the landscape. Yeah. Waterfalls and everything. There's got to have been more to draw you back so many times and for so long.
I mean, now it's almost like a second home for me now, and there's not really any question that I will continue to just go back there again and again. I have friends there. I stay in certain places that I just love. It's just like a little retreat for me. Mm-hmm. But from the photography side, you would think that you might get bored going back to the same places again and again, but I don't at all get bored. And the weather is always different. The light's always different. There's the grass is always different. Sometimes it's got snow, sometimes it's green.
Compositions to explore and find as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I saw a funny post last year on Twitter. And an Italian photographer got a picture of this mountain that I always stop and take pictures of, and he said, "Oh, I've taken pictures of this at sunrise, but I don't think many people do." He said, "I think we've run out of views to take pictures of in Iceland." And I was like, "That's the most ridiculous thing to say." It's like it's a massive country, really. It's got loads and loads of mountains, and every single person can take a different photo. Absolutely. Maybe there's 10 specific views that everybody has to take, which one of them is like this waterfall in front of this pointy mountain. Everybody has to take that photo, but there's infinite views, and every time I go, I will see something different. I mean, the light and the weather is always different. And also I got a drone last year, which has also given me a bit of a new lease of life of what to see as well. And there's always new places to go. I mean, I discovered an amazing canyon when I went in the summer in 2020 that I'd never even heard of, because I'd always really been in winter before, when it's covered in snow, so it's completely inaccessible and you wouldn't notice it. It was just a snowy valley. Yeah. But it's absolutely amazing, and there are loads of places like that are still yet to discover. There's always more views to go to see and beautiful things to see. And also I've tried to kind of go at different times of year now a bit more. So I've yet to go in January and April, but they're obviously on my list. But so it varies a lot in different seasons. I used to avoid the summer because I don't particularly like crowds and tourists gathered everywhere. But when I was there last summer, I kind of went early enough in the summer where it wasn't that busy, and also the amount of tourists hasn't got back up to normal yet. But last summer, going in the summer, the sun's in a completely different place. The light's completely different. You've got the whole of the evening where you can just go out and do more photography, which otherwise you've got
much longer.
And sunrise might not be ideal because it's at 3 a.m. or something, but then there's also loads of bird life, which is a completely different experience from a winter trip where there's not really much life. So there's always something to draw me back. I mean, I guess the things I liked about it to start with were it was just so kind of wild and remote, and I think maybe my trip to Antarctica awakened that love of that kind of scenery, just very stark, raw, just a real raw beauty. And it's not in the summer. It looks a lot prettier because there's lupins, all over the place, which people aren't very happy with because they're invasive. But there's purple flowers all over the place, and the grasses are all green, and it looks very lush and pretty. But most of the year it doesn't look like that. It's kind of harsh black and white and brown grasses, and it is. I don't know. There's something wild that just really appeals to me.
Yeah, great. Sounds like you could write the photographer's travel guide to Iceland, actually.
Well, I've been all around, and I don't think there's any particular. There's a couple of tourist sites in the Highlands that I haven't been to because they're only accessible in summer, late summer,
Yeah,
and you kind of need to have someone with a proper four-wheel drive. So I'm thinking I might do that this summer.
okay.
But yeah, I could write.
I was going to ask.
I should work for the tourist board.
I was going to ask you, are there any spots that are still on your bucket list in Iceland or anywhere else?
Oh well, there are lots of places. I mean, as I've said, I've travelled a lot around the world a couple of times, and also when I haven't been doing those big trips, I've usually tried to have a kind of a long haul trip, maybe once a year. So just in December 2019, me and my husband went to Costa Rica for a couple of weeks,
Nice.
which was an amazing place for photography. And in fact, that's why I bought my 100 to 400 mil lens, was basically to take pictures of the birds there.
Yeah.
And then realized I really like it for landscapes too.
Cool.
But yeah, so we went to, one year we went to Madagascar. One year we went to Borneo. I'm not a massive fan of hot places, so that's probably another reason I don't really do very well in the heat. So that's probably another reason that Iceland is kind of quite appealing, because it's generally not very hot. But yeah, I'll definitely continue to go to Iceland, at least a couple of times a year for as long as for the rest of my life. I'm looking into doing a tour next year, a workshop with another photographer, which I think would be a fun experience, because it is nice to do different things, like having the drone, as I say, has opened up kind of new views, and I do get kind of a bit set in my ways, and I stay in the same places and I have the same routines, and it's a bit like a kind of retreat for me from the world. But I kind of think I probably need to push myself, and I think doing a workshop or two would be actually a really enjoyable experience, imparting my knowledge and helping people enjoy it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So are there any things that you're doing out in the field, I guess, that might be different to what other people are doing, or are you sort of trying to, as you sort of said, tread a path that you've known and you're familiar with?
I mean, I as I say, I go back to some of the same places over and over. And like there's this one place, Jökulsárlón, which is this glacial lagoon and beach with icebergs on, and it's my favorite place in the world. It's crazy. It's just, some days you go there and there's no icebergs on this black sand beach, and then other days you go and it's absolutely stacked with these things, some which are a couple of meters high. There's like hundreds of them, and it's nicknamed the Diamond Beach. And I go back there and I take, I've taken so many photos in that place in so many different conditions. And I'm, and I'm always trying to look for something, something new. So I take lots of pictures of the icebergs close up, and actually I did use the macro once to take pictures of the kind of ice patterns inside the icebergs. And I'm always trying to look for something slightly different or slightly new. But to be honest, there's probably not anything that I take pictures of there now that I haven't done before. I think the only new thing I've really done is more of the wave sort of handheld long exposures, which I do on whichever beach I find some waves at. Yeah.
So what's motivating you at the moment creatively? Is it about recording experiences and, what you're seeing and, sharing that with the world? Or is it more trying to do something that is more about the art, I guess, of, photography?
I guess it's a bit of both. I mean, I think I've got a reasonable following on Twitter, which is the main social media that I use, and I get a lot of pleasure from sharing photos that people then say, "Oh, this is beautiful. Your photography lifts me." I'm not going to lie. I like getting comments that people are enjoying it.
That's why social media works.
Exactly. And also I think that really started to kick off when I did my trip in the winter of 2020, because everybody was kind of stuck at home, and there was me with my here's my day in Iceland, And people were kind of following my trip and finding it kind of quite fascinating and a bit, able to kind of forget themselves a bit. I mean, when I'm away, I feel like I forget what's going on in the world. I mean, I just went a couple of weeks ago on the day that Ukraine was invaded, and it was kind of almost a bit of a relief to be away from following the news all the time.
Sure.
By doing something completely different, which was driving, taking photos, and standing in snow showers, and I get lots of different. There's lots of reasons why I do it. I think part of it, as I say, is to get away from just a normal life. It's nice to just get away and have a break, being outdoors in the fresh air. I do laugh at myself when I'm out in kind of ridiculous wind and rain. It's like, this is, what am I doing? This is a holiday.
Most people are tucked up in a nice bar or something.
Most people's idea of a beach holiday is a white sand beach under palm trees in a warm climate, and mine's like standing on a black sand beach being bashed by wind and rain and hail.
And icebergs.
Watching the icebergs. But yeah, I don't know. I find it very, very good for my soul to be there. I think maybe I've got a bit of Viking in me, and I feel a bit at home with the people. People do start talking to me in Icelandic because I could look a bit Icelandic.
Okay.
And so which is nice. And I've got some good friends there now as well, which is another reason why it's really nice to go back.
I can imagine, having been so many times, you've developed a number of relationships and whatever there. It's
and I've actually there's a really kind of nice network of people who love Iceland as well, the Icelandophiles. So I actually last May met up with a woman I'd met on Twitter, and we went. She was over there to go to see the volcano with her husband, and we hiked up together. And I'd never met her before, but we'd kind of struck off a relationship on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then I met up with her on my recent trip as well. She was there as well. So I've kind of made friends in real life, like through the Iceland love too. There's quite a big community of us. It's quite a lot of English people, because it's quite easy to get to.
Yeah. For some people, I think
most people go there. Everyone wants to go back once you've been. It's like you just want a bit more.
Definitely. I'm still yet to go. It's still one of the bucket list locations. But
I'm like that with Tasmania. That's one place I really would love to spend like a month or two.
Yeah. Make it 2. Make it 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think a month is long enough.
No. Especially if I'm flying for 26 hours as well.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And that's one of the reasons why, if I'm going to do it, spending a week there is not going to be enough for me. But I guess one of the things that strikes me in this conversation is that you're doing all of this, and you're sharing it on Twitter, but it's not really your career. So
no.
Talk to me about why you do what you do. And
so I've had my whole career has been, I trained as an accountant, and I've worked in banking basically on and off for the last 25 years. And I've had quite a few times when I've taken time off because I don't really love it in the same way that I love my photography.
Oh.
But it pays well. So it kind of allows me to have this kind of hybrid life of having some time off and going to do things like the photography without having to try and make money out of it. And then I can then go back and have a job where I can do a reasonable job and earn a reasonable amount of money in a reasonable short period of time to top up my finances and save for my pension. And I kind of, I'm 51, and I'm getting to the point that I'm thinking about, maybe I'll retire in a few years' time.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I retire, I would probably try and make more of a career from the photography.
Sure.
As I say, I'm thinking of doing a workshop when my current job is a maternity leave cover, so it's got an end in sight.
Okay.
I just started a few months ago, so maybe after that I will. But I guess one thing I've always wanted to avoid is kind of ruining the photography for me by having to try and make money out of it.
Okay.
Because I mean, I make a bit of money, sell some prints. I've done some presentations, I do bits and pieces, but I think not having to make money out of it makes it obviously a lot easier. So I'm not having to sell myself so much. I'm not having to, do things like children photography and wedding photography, which I don't particularly want to do. Having said that, I did have a job where I did some portraits. No, I had in one of the banking jobs I had. One of my colleagues when I joined, I sort of looked to see if there was a photography club in the bank, and there was, and it was basically two guys who did these portrait sessions for employees, and they give money to charity for getting these like portrait photos. So I ended up taking over doing that. So I do about 6 half-day sessions a year, and that was kind of part of my volunteering leave that they gave us. So I was paid to do on the work premises. And I got to meet like 120 people through the company taking nice, professional photos for them. And I also learned about, how to a lot more about the lighting and portrait photography, and I actually really, really enjoyed it. So I mean, there are some commercial things that I think I could do, and I'm sure I would enjoy. And I've had a few like clients doing, particularly friends who paid me to take photos of them and their family, and I've obviously enjoyed doing that. But I think to try and make a decent living out of it is really quite hard work. I think if I did, I think I could probably do it by doing workshops, but that would then take me away from home, which I'm not really in a position to do that much at the moment. So
got it.
And it's kind of a bit of a shame that I'm not more in love with the photographing where I live, because I live in London and there's obviously lots to photograph here. It is a beautiful city.
Sure.
But I kind of don't think I've got the passion for doing workshops here that I would have, say, in Iceland, where I'm kind of in love with it. Whereas here it's just like, it's my home.
That's where you live, yeah. No, I get that, but I mean, I'm from Sydney and lived here most of my life, and I'm still trying to find new and different ways of shooting the city. I love London as well, but I think in terms of photography, I'm certainly spoilt for choice a little bit with Sydney. It is very photogenic, particularly with the harbour, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't shoot it as much as I used to, but because I'm sort of been focusing mainly on the beaches, and I think that's mainly something that you probably don't get quite as much of in and around London anyway. But
no, to travel a bit to get to one.
Yeah, just a bit. And then you got to deal with all the stones and rocks on the beach as well.
Yeah. Well, there's some very nice ones around the coast of the UK, but
there are, yeah. I've shot a few of them myself, actually. There's some.
I've actually, in the last few months, I've actually been to. There's a local park called Richmond Park, which is one of the royal parks, and it's quite famous because it's got a bunch of deer. And there's a big community of photographers that go there regularly, and I'm kind of planning to go tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. before work, because there was fog forecast and the sunrise is like 10 to 6 in the morning. As I said, I'm not very good at getting up in the morning, so I don't know whether I'll do it or not, but it's actually been quite nice, because I've gone sort of every few weeks since last September. I bought a second-hand car, so I'm able to drive there, whereas it's only 4 miles away, but there's no public transport to get to it, and I don't particularly want to get an Uber at 6 o'clock in the morning with all my camera gear. I just feel a bit nervous. So, but I've been going there regularly, and I've met some other nice photographers as well through doing so. So I am trying to force myself to enjoy the surroundings nearby too. But I mean, it's interesting actually. One thing I don't feel very comfortable safety-wise in London and everywhere.
I can understand that. Yeah.
So going out with, I mean, the amount of gear I've got is quite, it's quite expensive, and I haven't been out with all of my gear in London, like, and not with a tripod anyway, for years. So I mean, it probably would be, maybe I'll set myself a few challenges of going back into the center of the city with, you know, with my camera gear. I think when I've had jobs, I've maybe taken my camera in, obviously, to do the portraits, and I would maybe nip out at lunchtime and do a few handheld, you know, city shots. But I probably should push myself a bit more to take some more pictures, because London is really a fantastic city, and it is what started off my passion for taking photos all the time when I was walking along the river.
Yeah, nice.
Now I just take iPhone ones on walking the dog.
Well, you still take a pretty good shot with an iPhone now.
Yeah, getting better.
How would you describe your style, and what influences and I guess who has influenced your style the most?
I guess I mean, there aren't any kind of photographers that I would particularly say had kind of influenced me on my journey, like, because I didn't study photography. I didn't, you know, particularly know about any masters. You know, I was aware of Ansel Adams, but didn't particularly know his work that much. In terms of other photographers that have influenced me, there's a few that I've seen on social media who probably have. One of them is a guy called Mark Littlejohn, who he won the Landscape Photographer of the Year in the UK in 2014, and he, you know, his work has generally been from the Lake District, and more recently he's moved up to Scotland. And I love his work, partly because he zooms in on landscapes and picks up just the details of landscapes, and you don't have to have the sky. And I think maybe he's had an influence on me a little bit. There's been a couple of seascape photographers, one called David Baker, and a woman called Rachel Talabart, who, you know, they're just fantastic sea photographers. And I mean, there's a really good photography community on Twitter. So there's loads and loads and loads, I think, who've probably just all combined to help form what I like. But I think mostly it's been about just me taking photos and seeing what I like from what I produce. And there are certain things that I definitely do much more photography now with the longer lens, and zoom in on the details more. You know, which isn't for everybody. A lot of people still like the big wide vistas. And there's a few in Iceland where you have to get your wide angle out, because there's these big mountains, you know, reflected in the sand and the beach, and those are always actually kind of very popular, those kinds of photos. But for me personally, I probably prefer, you know, zooming in on a little bit of that where it's a bit more abstract. I think I've become a bit more abstract in the photography I do now.
Okay. So talk me through the process. And in terms of process, I don't mean just in the field. I mean in terms of planning. You know, spending 2 months in Iceland, are you planning every day, or are you letting things flow and move with weather and tides and so forth?
So I didn't. I mean, I didn't used to be such a planner, but when I first started traveling, because you know, there weren't things like booking.com when I first started traveling years and years ago. So you were able to kind of, I did quite a lot of backpacking where you just show up somewhere, look in the Lonely Planet book, find where you are on the map, find somewhere to stay, find another place to stay, you know. And that was kind of my first experiences of traveling, were very much see how it goes. And I also had, you know, if you've got lots of time, it's a lot easier. But I guess in the last, you know, since the internet's been like proper and you can do all your booking and stuff, you can't just show up, because you won't find anywhere to stay, or
nobody's got
stuff will be gone. And so now I do kind of pretty much plan everything from, you know, before I go. With the big trip in the winter, I didn't plan everything. I had a kind of rough idea of where I was going to go, but and also there were a few places which were still quite busy, which I wanted to stay at, so I had to kind of book those in advance. But on that trip, it was actually amazing, because I was able to plan it as I went along. toward the second half, which I hadn't done for years in a trip. So as I said, I just decided to extend it 2 weeks and go up to the Westfjords. And it was like I wasn't booking places. I was waiting to see what the weather was like, to see how far I'd get. And then there was one day there'd been a storm and a blizzard for 2 days, and I've been stuck in this dreadful dull cabin for 3 nights. And finally the weather cleared. So I wasn't sure what the roads were going to be like. So I just, got in the car and see how far I can get to. Got to one place, it's like, still got another hour of light. I can get to this next place, and got to the next place, and basically got on booking.com on my phone in the car and booked a place, and then showed up. And it was kind of really nice to have the flexibility to be able to do that. Because you can't really do that in most places these days, and you certainly can't do that in Iceland when it's busy with tourists.
Yeah, definitely.
So usually I book stuff in advance, and I actually kind of plan my trips around the availability of the places I want to stay as well. So I go back to a couple of places and stay in the same places, and try and stay there for sort of 3 or 4 nights in each of 2 particular places. So I kind of book the timing around when they're available. Last summer, again, I was a bit more flexible because I had a longer trip, but that was quite difficult. And when my husband came over, we ended up struggling to find some places to stay a few times, and had to kind of organise my trip around where, have to do some detours to find somewhere where I could actually find accommodation.
Yeah, right.
But in terms of the photography in all of that, I do have spreadsheets which I put in where I'm staying, where I'm going to. And then I put in the sunrise and sunset times. So I do have a kind of a plan, and then some of them I write detailed plans about where I'm going to go. Especially if I'm on the move from one place and staying in a different place, a couple of 100 kilometers away the next night, I might do a plan on my phone and say, right, sunrise here at this time, leave, this time, drive to here, stay this long. And I do sometimes give myself these kind of strict plans like that. But most of the time it's, see what the weather's like the next day to determine if I'm going to set my alarm for sunrise. And I do spend quite a bit of time sometimes thinking, where am I going to go? And I'm kind of a bit overwhelmed because there's lots of places I like. There's this one particular little cottage I stay in, and there's 2 really nice mountain ranges kind of on either side, and then there's this nice canyon in the middle, and then there's a nice bit of coastline, and it's like, where do I go? And I kind of panic a little bit, and because it's sometimes a bit overwhelming. It's a bit like if you get somewhere nice at sunset and you're like, got to get the right shots, and sometimes you're kind of worried you're going to miss it, and there's just kind of too much. So you have to just sort of calm yourself down and say, you just take what you take.
Okay, so what about in the field? So you've made your decision, you've
driven somewhere,
or you've checked your spreadsheet, and you know what time you're going there, etc. So what are you doing when you get into the field? Have you got an idea of, or a concept of the composition in mind before you get there, or is it more free flowing when you actually get on site?
Well, I guess there are certain places I've been to quite a few times, and I do tend to take some similar kind of photos like that. So there's this one place called Stocksness, and the mountain's called Vestrahorn, and it's very well photographed by many people. And it's this big mountain peaks with which on one side there's these amazing sand dunes, and then the other side there's a beach which is really flat, and the black sand gets very reflective, so you can get perfect reflections in it. And then there's a little pond I know that's really nice and pretty that's nearby. So I kind of usually when I go to this place, I park up in a certain place, and then I do a little wander and take some pictures on the beach at the rocks, take some pictures on the sand reflected, and then go to the dunes, look for some nice ripples, take some pictures of the pond. And I kind of generally take the similar kind of photos there. If the weather's different, then, if it's snow, I went there a few years ago and it was amazing snow showers coming through, and there was some really cool sculpted dunes which had got snow that was sculpted with bits of black sand on top, and it was that was like, oh my god, there's all these new compositions and possibilities. So, got these weird curves and with the mountains and the different distance. So sometimes it's, it's like see what you get, but usually in places like that, I do probably take the same kind of shots compositionally. I mean, I'll be running around basically looking for some decent ripples in the sand on these sand dunes that haven't got footprints on. And if I'm there at sunrise, hope they've got some frost on them. So there are certain places like that where I will take similar kinds of shots. But it depends. And with the beach with the icebergs, it depends on the conditions. If the icebergs are on the beach and the sun is shining, you can get some nice reflections, and you can get close ups of the ice. Sometimes there's only a few out in the distance, and I think, oh, this looks like a good time to do some waves crashing onto the iceberg shots. Sometimes there's lots where I think, oh, that will make some nice trails. So a lot of it depends on the conditions. And then other times I just stop at the side of the road because I see something that looks cool. And I might have my 24-70 lens on and use that, or I might quickly get the other one on and zoom in at something. And so a lot of it is kind of side of the road shots as well. And often with those really cool storms, like I was driving back a couple of weeks ago and there was an amazing storm. Actually, I suddenly saw in my rearview mirror. And I was like, got to find somewhere to stop so I can take pictures of this. And then there was a car park to go and visit this crashed plane. So I pulled in there, took a few pictures, got in the car and carried on. It's like you have to sometimes just pull over, but there's not that many places you can always pull over. So I do miss shots like that sometimes, which is
nothing more frustrating than seeing something that you want to shoot but not finding somewhere to stop.
And I had a couple of experiences on my winter trip. One in particular that really annoys me that I didn't stop. We're driving across this snowy pass, and it was a beautiful day, and there's this little hut at the top of this pass, and it was completely covered in ice and like snow and ice, and it looked amazing. But I didn't want to stop because there wasn't anywhere to stop, even though there was no one else on the road, and I could easily have done so safely. I didn't. And you could see, 16 months later, I'm still really annoyed with myself about it. I have to go back there in winter again but there are things like that sometimes you miss, and you kick yourself and you think about for a few years afterwards. Generally I do try and stop if I can, if I see something so it's a kind of mix of some old shots that I've taken before that I like to take, similar methods. Sometimes it's just on the big trips I did, I went to visit quite a few new places as well, so a lot of that was just right, well, let's see what there is here. I might have had an idea from pictures of some of the things, the geological features, but I discovered a few new beaches that I hadn't been to in the last couple of years, and that's just great for exploring, to see what there is. Which not things that, like one of my pictures that did the best on Twitter was just a picture of this kind of almost hexagonal rock on the beach with these tiny little rocks in the cracks around it. And it's an amazing sight. And I really like it, but I didn't, and then people loved it. And I was like, well, that's really surprising, because to me, it's just like a funny little geological thing that I really like. But it turns out that people found that pleasing too.
I'm always surprised at the number of shots that I go, oh, that looks like B-roll. Yeah, I'll put it up anyway.
and it's like, everyone loved it. I know there's so much in Iceland that also changes as well. Because a lot of the time I go to beaches, and the tides change everything, and the beaches can change from year to year. So I went back to that same spot because I remembered exactly where it was. I went to try and find this hexagonal piece to take another picture of, just because I'd enjoyed photographing it before, and I couldn't find it. And I think in the 6 months between visits, there was some more rocks had been brought in and covered it up, so it was gone. And it was like, well, that's actually really cool, because it was just there for a short time. I saw it when the tide was low. Now it's not visible, and there's other similar ones that I enjoyed. But there's so many things in Iceland that I think I'll always find things like that to just marvel at, that I haven't even seen before.
Yeah, very cool.
And then, like last year there was a volcano erupting, so that was an added benefit, an added bonus. And if that happens again, I'll be on a plane. I'll be on a plane again.
Why not?
Yeah.
So in terms of you've got your shot and you got it home or got it to where you can process it. Are you thinking about the processing before you get to that point, or are you? So as you're shooting, you're thinking about how you're going to process that, and sometimes. I guess does the processing influence the shooting, or does the shooting influence the processing?
To be honest, I don't do a huge amount of processing. Like I don't ever swap out skies or anything. I don't do composites. I just shoot, and then my editing will be to try and make it look, a better version of it.
The best version.
The best version of it and hopefully representing what I saw with my eyes as well.
Okay, sure.
Which have better dynamic range sometimes I'll take pictures and have in mind, well, this would make a good black and white conversion, for example. Especially if it's like really bright blue skies and harsh sun and harsh shadows, or if it's gloomy and grim. Like there's a waterfall picture I took where it was a really horrid day and the waterfall was going upwards because it was so windy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, really miserable. And the grasses are a kind of nasty brown because it was the end of the winter, early summer, and it just all looked a bit nasty. But I knew that it would work in black and white. And it was also still quite an amazing sight watching these waterfalls going upwards. So I probably didn't think at the time, oh yes, I'll process this as black and white. But as soon as I opened the file, I was like, yeah, this needs to be converted to black and white. Get rid of the nasty grasses, so you can't really see that color obviously in the black and white. Put a nice big vignette to make it look a bit more atmospheric. So I do that with some images, but I think mostly when I'm taking them, my editing that I have in mind is just minimal to try and kind of keep it as accurate as possible. My iceberg shots, the blues will be deeper in my photos that I've edited than they were to start with, I'm sure, because I'm increasing the contrast a bit. I don't pump up the saturation, and so often I have to reduce it if I've put the contrast up a bit or whatever. But I try and keep it fairly natural. Although I do occasionally do completely wild edits. Like I've got a picture of a horse that was a brown horse with blonde mane and white stripe, and it was windswept, so the mane's kind of windswept over its ear, and I got a picture of it from the side, and I looked at it and I thought, yeah, this will work with black and white. So I did the most ridiculous kind of harsh black and white conversion, and it's just basically a black and white horse with just the kind of light bits on the mane and the stripe on the nose, and then you can see a little bit of hair like backlit by the sun under the chin, and it's really, really cool. But the initial photo didn't look anything like that. So I do sometimes have a play around. Especially, I guess, with things like horses as well, where you can be a bit more, I don't know, maybe a bit more artistic. I don't, as I say, I don't do a huge amount of processing. Obviously, things like Northern Lights photos, you kind of have to, because you probably need to do quite a bit of work to make them halfway decent for someone to look at.
I know what you mean.
Do you get to see the Aurora Australis down there ever, or a bit
not in Sydney, but there's been a couple of recent sightings as far north as Goulburn, which is sort of halfway between Sydney and Canberra, which is way north of where you'd normally see it. Tasmania is really the only place where you're going to see it regularly, and I'm quite jealous of some of the guys down there. There's a lot of Aurora sightings down there, but I think
there's like northern Scotland here. It's like
I think the New Zealanders have got it all over us though, because they're just that little bit further south and down the bottom end of the South Island, and But that's relatively close. I guess that's kind of like our Iceland.
Yeah.
It's not too far to get to, and not too expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the most notable experience you've had out shooting?
Most notable. Well, the things that I remember instantly are the times when I've fallen over, which happens pretty much once on every trip.
Okay.
I haven't touched wood. I haven't hurt myself badly on any trip, but I have hurt myself a few times. And because I'm traveling on my own, it's something I have to be. It's usually a good wake up call to remind me to be more careful.
Yeah.
On my recent trip, I just was taking pictures of this nice big mountain thing in a little kind of inland lake, and I've been to this place loads of times before, and I've actually had a similar experience, but not quite as bad. But I've got these rubber welly boots on, so I kind of weighed out a little bit. I thought it was about 2 inches deep. There were some grasses underneath, and then I went a little bit further, and suddenly my foot my left foot just sank into a piece of ice, like up to just a couple of inches above my knee. And I was set over the top of my boots, and then I was kind of stuck. And I had everything on me. I had my camera backpack, my camera out, my tripod in my hand, my drone bag over my shoulder, my mobile phone in my pocket on my leg. So, and I had to try and get out without getting myself wet, knowing that the water was a lot deeper than I thought. Yeah. And I managed to get out, and then I fell and whacked my other knee on the ice. And this was about 3 weeks ago, and it's only just finally healed enough that I can actually kneel down on it. And then I got out, and I was like, okay, that was really annoying, but not the end of the world. I haven't broken anything. So then I got the drone out, and then I plugged in the phone, and it's like, your phone connection's wet, you can't use it. And I'm like, oh no, I messed up my phone. Anyway, the phone it just needed to dry out overnight, and it was fine. So none of my equipment was damaged. But I've had a couple of others where I've slipped over. One on a slimy rock, and I again cracked my knee and my thumb, and thought I'd actually broken my nose because my camera hit my nose. And
ouch.
It turns out that I hadn't fortunately done anything to my nose, but I had damaged my thumb quite badly, so I couldn't use my thumb for opening the car boot, for example, and for a couple of months. But again, I was okay. Another time I slipped on ice and landed and broke a couple of ribs. So those, I now have these crampons that I strap onto my boots for those situations. But they wouldn't have helped me on the falling through the ice bit. That was just careless. Those are kind of memorable, like, note to self: don't do silly things, be careful.
Safety's paramount.
Absolutely. I've had some other kind of just memorable photography experiences, like some of the northern lights that I've seen. The first time I saw there's a phenomenon called corona, where they're basically coming down at you straight down, and it looks like they're going to fall out of the sky at your head. And the first time I saw that was, or maybe the second time, but it was at Australian, which is a great place to see the northern lights, because you can hopefully get pictures of them reflected in the water with icebergs. So it's a pretty cool place. But there was a bunch of I think there were Japanese girls, maybe about 12 of them, and we were sitting on this ridge overlooking the moraine, overlooking the lagoon, and these lights started kind of above us, and they were just screaming and giggling, and it was such a sweet but bizarre experience. As there was no other noise, and then suddenly they were just literally screaming like little children with joy. It was quite it was a very, very surreal experience. I guess some of the experiences I've had, like with the volcano, were really amazing. Just watching a volcano erupt in front of you and capturing that was just unforgettable. And I was playing around with a bit of long exposure as well to try and get a few different shots. And but again, that was a really special experience, and not something that you forget very, very quickly. getting the drone up over the lava, that's certainly an experience you don't forget, because your heart rate goes up for that double.
I can imagine the heat coming up on a plastic drone.
Yeah. And then there's someone next to you talking about how theirs has been heat damaged, and someone on the other side saying, oh, they lost theirs yesterday. And and I managed to get my drone up a couple of times and back.
I can imagine in a few thousand years there'll be these drone remains found in these lava fields, and people going, how did that get there?
Well, there's a basalt column canyon that's in the east of the country that I first went to a couple of years ago, which is absolutely amazing. And I went back there in the summer with my drone, and I was hoping that wasn't going to be anyone else around, because I don't really like using it if there's other people, because it's a bit annoying. But fortunately, there was just like one couple left by the time I got to this place, and they were leaving. So I got my drone up for like 5 minutes until the next lot came. And there's this great view you can get with the columns on either side, and there's green water below. It's really cool.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the canyon was a little DJI Mini, which just basically looked as if it had been splattered on the side of one of these columns. I was like, that's a warning sign again, not to be very careful with your drone.
Careful where you fly your drone.
Yeah. It was really weird though. It just looked as if it just kind of stuck to the side of it. It hadn't fallen off.
It's like a bug on a windshield.
Yeah, exactly. It was like a bug splattered against the rock.
Well,
yeah, I think the geology is definitely. Don't know if I've banged on about that enough. The geology is definitely something that in Iceland that's really special. I think one of the things about that is that even in really bad weather, there's usually something that you can photograph, because there's always something to see. The geology is it's just, I mean, the volcanism is just amazing, and these basalt columns everywhere, and it's just interesting things.
Yeah, no, I love that sort of landscape.
Yeah.
Speaking of hitting walls, have you ever hit a creative one?
I definitely have days when I don't really feel very motivated, and maybe on my longer trips I needed to kind of allow myself to have days off as well. And fortunately in Iceland the weather usually allows you that anyway. So so you can have a day when it's really horrible weather, and it's actually just kind of nice to not have to feel that you have to do something. I think when I go to Iceland, I've always got some kind of motivation and inspiration. It sometimes takes me a couple of days to get into it when I'm back there, to kind of really, and that's usually fine because I'm usually driving to somewhere where I know that I'll be fine when I get there. But yeah, sometimes in the first couple of days I feel like not really into this yet. I haven't got my Fojo. But in terms of, I mean sometimes I find I've had a trip to Iceland where I haven't, people said, oh, was it good? Did you get good shots? And I was like, yeah, it wasn't the best. And then I've had a couple, like the one in February 2020, which was probably my best trip, where it was just, the weather was so stormy. It was just, and it was just fantastic. And I just got some amazing shots, whereas others where you just kind of think, it was a bit, I might have taken 500 photos, but I don't actually like any of them or do anything with any of them. So I definitely have ups and downs.
Like
huh? Yeah.
We've all had shots like that.
Yeah, and sometimes the weather is just really meh, and if you can't see the mountains and it's drizzly and and because I've been like loads of times now, I don't feel like I have to go out and take photos and force myself.
Sure.
I guess if I was doing a workshop, I would probably have to drag my group out, but when you're on your own and you've been loads of times, you don't really have that, so you can allow yourself to do nothing. I mean, in terms of creativity, I haven't been inspired by London apart from my local park for years now, and maybe that's just because I associate like the centre of London with my jobs, and it's like that's where I work. And but I have been definitely more inspired recently by my local park, because it is lovely, and especially in winter and autumn with fog and bit of frost and the deer rutting.
Nice.
But I don't generally, although I used to take my camera out and every day, 10 years ago, now I barely take my camera out when I'm at home in London. It's almost like it's used for Iceland and holidays or trips.
Yeah, sure.
otherwise, which is kind of a shame. But as I say, maybe I need to push myself a bit more and give myself a little challenge to do some photography in the city.
Do you ever go back into the archives and look at some of those, the shoots where you go, okay, I've taken 500 photos, don't really like them. Do you ever go back into them and go, actually, that's not that bad?
I do. And actually I do. And that's actually a really good piece of advice I would say to people is always look at your archives, because you never know what you'll feel about something. You don't always feel the same about a bunch of photos at the time as you might do even a week later or a year later or 5 years later. Because I had a year off of not working, I did quite a lot of that and looking through the archives, and often if I've had a really good day when I've taken like 500 photos and I've picked out like 5 that I absolutely love, the chances are there's going to be a whole load more. And on this trip in February 2020, there was this one morning with this incredible storm, and the light was just spectacular, and the waves were spectacular. And I ended up looking through those photos a few months ago, and I had like loads and loads and loads of them. So it's like I've actually got loads more photos that I love that I haven't done anything with. And I quite like to post. Like I've just posted a photo that I took 9 years ago, which is one of my favourite ISPO ones. I quite like the Facebook memory thing where you get this is your memory from 9 years ago and this is your memory from 2 years ago, and I do sometimes, if I remember that I've been somewhere, I'll have a look and see, look, I took on 5 years ago today. And I think those are quite nice to just kind of remind you to have a look at them. But definitely. But I also think if you've improved, I've probably improved with my editing techniques. It's often worth re-editing photos that you especially if you took them like 10 years ago, because the software is much better and my eye is probably better of what I like.
And no doubt you've learnt more about processing, and you've probably got a very different style to what you had 10 years ago as well. And I think that's as you said, a really important piece of advice to people is get into your archives and have a look at what you did, 5 years ago and redo it.
And actually, another piece of advice, and also looking at archives, is just to see how much you've improved. It's quite good to quite good to motivationally just, and also just when you're learning to look at your photos with a really critical eye. I think that's when I first started really learning, was when I actually looked at my photos and said, why aren't I happy with them? What am I not doing right? Why are those ones where I travel around the world with my point and shoot? What was wrong with them? They weren't sharp enough. And well, why not? And how do I improve that?
Well, it gives you the areas where you can improve as well, the things to focus on changing.
I think people aren't necessarily critical enough of their own photos, especially when I think it's very important to be very critical. Although now, having said that, I'm quite happy to post photos that I don't think are absolutely amazing, because it's kind of, I like posting lots of photos. I don't expect every one of them to be fantastic, but then technically they're okay. They're just, the light might be a bit boring and it might not be the most amazing thing, but you know what I mean. When you're learning, you need to make sure that you understand what technique you need to improve on, and the sharpness thing is definitely a crucial one.
Absolutely.
Unless you're doing handheld and long exposures.
ICM, as you said, intentional camera movement is
slightly blurred because
one outlet you've got.
Too slow is not the same thing, though.
No, very true. I guess, speaking of advice, what advice would you give 10-year-old Sophie?
God, don't become an accountant. No, it's an interesting one, actually, because if I was a kid now, with all the technology that we've got now and the potential for what technology could do, I mean, photography is an amazingly rewarding thing to do. I hope that there is a proper model of making a proper financially viable career for people, because it is a fantastic thing to do. And we'll always have stuff online that people want to see. People always want to see pictures and videos. Maybe it will be more videos, but I don't know. I kind of sometimes think, oh, I regret doing what I did of doing my accounting because it's not really my passion. But then in some ways, the reason I still do it is because I enjoy it enough and it pays well. And I can then enjoy doing this
Sure.
and not having to worry about, if I want to buy a mirrorless camera, I can afford to because I've got this other job. So I don't know, maybe try and find a balance. And I think I've found that balance reasonably well now by having this kind of hybrid career. Good on people who do the photography full time, because it's bloody hard work to actually, make a living out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I think my life's definitely been happier since I've had this as a sort of sidekick passion. Definitely having a passion and something that you love doing creatively or whatever is really important.
Absolutely.
And photography has definitely made me a happier person. I might have made me a bit more antisocial as well. But yeah, I probably wouldn't do that much different actually if I started again.
Yeah, cool. What do you like to do when you're not taking photos or not editing or not tripping off to Iceland?
I can't remember the last time I had a night where I didn't edit photos and post photos on Twitter. Literally, I can't remember the last time. Because of the last couple of years also because of COVID, haven't been socializing. I've kind of forgotten what my life was like before. I used to, have an office job and we'd go out maybe once every couple of weeks. I'd go out on a night with people from work. My husband and I would go away for weekends drinking beer, like craft beer, and go to Belgium and places and watching TV, watch TV and watch movies. But basically my whole, I log off my work computer and I go onto my other, I've got to use my old Mac because my Citrix doesn't work on the new one, which is really irritating. So I've just got a new Mac and I'll move over to the sofa on that and do some photo editing and chat with people who are strangers on Twitter, and who've become friends. But it's a kind of strange little life. But yeah, I don't go out as much as I used to, that's for sure.
I don't think anybody does, do they?
Well, no, and I'm a bit paranoid about COVID because I've managed to avoid it so far. And but yeah, I probably don't really have any other hobbies. I like doing jigsaws actually, which I haven't done for ages. And in the first bit of lockdown, I actually made some of my Iceland photos into 1,000-piece jigsaws.
Okay.
And I took a couple of days off work, once every couple of weeks, just to do a jigsaw. And one of them I did was of Northern Lights, and it was the most ridiculous thing. It came out too dark, and it was absolutely impossible. Another one I did was a close up of a abstract shot of an iceberg with a kind of fairly repeated pattern, and that was absolutely impossible. But I love doing them, and
they're the best kind of jigsaws, aren't they?
Well, absolutely, exactly. I made them. I chose pictures that I knew. I started off with some more easy ones with a mountain and some sky and a glacier, so that was quite an easy one. And then I moved on to these hard ones. It was right, I'm going to challenge myself, but my God, they were hard. But yeah, I like doing jigsaws, but I haven't done one for ages.
Fair enough. Are there any photographers out there that you think I should be talking to on the podcast?
I give Mark Littlejohn a shout. So he's the guy I mentioned earlier who was in the Lakes in South Scotland. I actually did a workshop with him, the only workshop I've been on, in November last year in the northwest of Scotland. And I went on it partly because I love that area and I hadn't been for years, and partly because I really like him as a person and as a photographer. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do a workshop, I should do it with him. But he's a bit different in terms of his style. He's not, he doesn't use a tripod. He doesn't do. But he's kind of obsessed with finding the right light and the right composition, and he's a great guy. He's a great character. So
cool. Thank you for that.
There's quite a few other British photographers that I follow. I guess it's quite a kind of tight-knit community, and it turns out when I went on this thing that couple of the other people had been on other workshops with a bunch of other photographers, and there's a few of them that are quite famous and run workshops, and everybody knows everybody. So it's quite a funny little world. Yeah,
it's a bit like that over here, particularly in Sydney. Yeah. Even up and down the coast and around Australia, there's quite quite the community, which is, to be honest, as you said, it's a very nice thing.
Well, I actually just did a presentation to the Blue Mountain camera.
Okay, yeah.
Blue Mountain photography group.
Yeah.
Which while I was in Iceland, which was quite funny. So I did that one at like 8 o'clock in the morning Iceland time on a miserable day, fortunately, and it was evening their time. I was really nervous it was going to be one of those gorgeous sunrises, and I was sitting inside doing a talk, but it turns out it was fine. But yeah, so I learned there's all these photo clubs everywhere. So I've never been in a photography club, and I realized there's a massive network of them all over the world.
Absolutely, yeah. I've done a few presentations to a couple of camera clubs here in Sydney as well, and actually did one about a year or so ago during COVID, which was interesting, doing it online instead of in person.
Yeah, well, I've only done them online, so I haven't done anything in person yet.
But I think they're. I've personally never been a member of one either, but I think it's a great thing for people learning photography to get involved in a club and get to know people and their experiences.
And it gives you an impetus to do one of the ones I did was a local one, and they have got quite a lot of competitions, and it just means that they're out there doing. Taking photos just because they've got this kind of, a little impetus to make them do so.
Yeah.
So what are the main things that you like to take photos of then? What's your favourite subject then? You said beaches.
Yeah, mostly seascapes. So, water movement, waves. You got to find some nice rocks to, get the water swirling around and so forth.
Yeah.
Those and waterfalls, but I also do a bit of architecture and cityscape stuff. So almost always landscapes, almost never people, which to my wife's never-ending complaint, she's always
really
saying,
most people don't want photos taken of themselves.
Well, this is it, and whenever I do take a photo, I look terrible in that. I don't want you showing anyone there. Okay, well.
Yeah, I think there's something really special about wave photography, and just the it just allows you so much creativity as well.
Absolutely, and it's always different.
It's never ending and never the same. It's just
I can go to the same beach, 7 or 8 times in a couple of months, and each time I go, I'm finding something new and something different. Even if it's just the fact that the sand has shifted and exposed rocks or covered rocks over.
Like I was saying with the geological thing I found, it was. But it was, the beach with the icebergs on, there was this really weird little kind of wave breaking parallel to the beach this year because of where the sand had shifted to, which I've never seen before, and I've been there a dozen or more years, but it suddenly just get this kind of almost like a rip of it swooshing past parallel to the beach instead of crashing towards you. I was like, oh my God, I've never seen that before. It's completely changed. And I think it was where two waves met. This kind of reaction, but it was just fascinating how different they can be. Just
the patterns that the water can make as well. I'm usually looking for something that's going to, show off that water movement. And do those longish exposures. The other thing I've gotten into recently is shooting very long exposures at nautical twilight first thing before. So we're talking about an hour to hour and
before civil twilight starts.
Yeah, but also you're getting the faintest glow, and if you're lucky with some high cloud, a little bit of red. But you're just getting the faintest glow on the horizon. And I was actually up at Catherine Hill Bay, which is about an hour and a half north of Sydney. And there's this old rusty pier that goes out into the bay, and it's disused. It's an old coal loading pier, and I could barely see the rocks in front of me, But you're sitting there with the shutter open for 7 or 8 minutes,
Okay.
collecting lots of light, and you can get something that kind of looks like daylight. I was lucky there was some low cloud which was moving quite nicely, and over 7 or 8 minutes, that just went into these huge long streaks across the
nice.
The water, of course, is really smooth and misty, and so it's just a different sort of style to that more faster pace sort of seascape of wave movement and whatever. It's just smoothing everything out and making a different style of image. But you only get it's challenging as well, because you really only got maybe you can probably get 2 images, 2 exposures done before the light has come up, and you're down to
2 minutes and
2 minutes
1 minute.
1 minute. And then you're into, you're then having to, load up ND filters and whatever to.
I had one experience actually that you just reminded me of, when my November-December trip to Iceland in 2020, where the clouds were really, really cool. It was before sunrise, and there wasn't the sun. There was a lot of cloud at the horizon, so there wasn't actually a sunrise massively to speak of, but there were really cool clouds and they were moving quite fast. So I did quite a few long exposures, and I've got some great strips, and some of those I turned to black and white to make them look a bit more dramatic. But it's that time of day. It's kind of quite cool when as you say, you haven't got much time.
No,
and if you've messed up the bulb time, you've done it.
You got to turn up very early and be patient during the exposure, because there's not much to do while you. And it's not like you can do a.
Yes, you can take another camera and do.
Well, you can take another camera, but you're not likely to get much out of your phone either. So at that hour, because there's not enough light for that. So it's just a different style. For me, it's a lot slower.
It's reminded me of another photographer that I really like on Instagram. It's called Helen Trust.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
She does really long exposures and squares, and a lot of them are sort of seascapes and clouds, and they're yes, she probably does a lot of that, like 7 or 8 minute long ones, but they're really they're just really peaceful and pleasing.
No, they're a lot of fun to play around with, and the editing on them's interesting as well. You've kind of got to be really careful about how you adjust your contrasts and so forth, because some of those the gradations between the tones and the colours. If you push your contrast too far, you can get these horrible sort of
banding and.
Just the blue shadows will go purple, and but you can also get some really cool and interesting colours, because and I was talking to another photographer about this. He does this a lot, where you can get sort of a blue tone shifting to yellow as the sun is coming up. And the end result over a 7 or 8 minute exposure is a green.
Wow.
So you have green clouds, which looks really interesting.
Strange.
Yeah.
You probably think your white balance was wrong, and
that's what he was saying. He said at first he thought there was something wrong with the sensor or the camera, and so he did a bit of research, and no, this is basically what happens. So, it's just.
I've never really thought about that, because I guess I haven't really done that many. I don't do that much really long exposure. If I do, it's usually a minute or two. But
a lot of people don't like getting up early in the morning to do that.
If you're doing it when the light's changing like that, it must be because it can change.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I was out. Was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? And we had a really nice sort of set of high cloud that went really red. And I went to Whale Beach, which is a beach on the northern suburbs of Sydney. And, it started out and there was just sort of this tinge of sort of magenta red, started to glow a little bit, and then it just sort of got, brighter and brighter and redder and more orange, reds and yellows and whatever came on, during that exposure. So, yeah, I haven't actually started processing that one, so it'll be interesting.
Sounds like an interesting one.
Yeah, but it's just the nice part about it is until you've actually sort of, been able to finish the shot and then review it in the back of the camera or when you get it home, you don't really know exactly what you're going to get. I mean, you're going to get streaked clouds if there's cloud movement and so forth. That's,
I think that's part of the fun and why I like doing the iceberg, like wave trail shots and wave shots, because you just don't know what you're going to get, because even if you have no idea, even if you just see a little version of it on your screen, you can't really see what you've captured. And often if sometimes when I'm out taking pictures in sunshine, the colors and the sea, I mean, it's the sun's in front of me and it's difficult to see the colors. But then when I get the photo on a big screen, I can see the greens and the blues that are kind of backlit by the sun, and it's like, wow, that's actually really amazing. But you can't see what you've done until you get home. So it's a bit like, I guess, getting your film developed, but
definitely, yeah,
a bit cheaper and quicker than that. You've got a lot more control over it.
Yeah, much cheaper and much quicker.
Yeah.
All right, I've got one more question, and for the regular listeners to the podcast, they know what's coming. And for them, I think it's probably the most important question I can ask. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Yeah, why not? I actually had there's actually a place in Iceland that's a nice little guest house I stay in near Geysir, which is the geyser that erupts in the Golden Circle that everyone goes to see. But this is a nice cheap guest house nearby, and next to it is a pizza place and a camping place, and they have all sorts of weird things. So they have banana. The last time I went there, I had banana and blue cheese, I think.
Okay, wow,
that was quite nice too. No, I don't mind pineapple on pizza. I
haven't had the fermented shark on pizza.
No, I've never tried that. Someone was sitting next to us in a restaurant in the summer and had it, and it was actually tiny little cubes eaten on cocktail sticks, and it didn't. I thought, oh well, if it's actually like that, I might be able to do it, but. And you wash it down with a little schnapps thing as well called Brennivin, which is supposed to be, I think I've tried it. It's pretty vile. Yeah. But no, I haven't tried that yet. I've managed to avoid it.
A bit like cough medicine, eh?
Yeah. What about you, the pineapple?
I'm a neutral. If it's there, I'll have it.
Exactly.
It's not something I'll order though. But
no, I wouldn't order it. But I wouldn't pick it off. And I say I did order one that had banana on it, and it was quite nice.
Fair enough. Cool. Well, thank you ever so much. It's been marvellous.
Oh, thank you for inviting me on.
Learning more about you. Where can people find your work?
So I have a website, which is www.sophiecarphotography.com. So it's a fairly easy one to remember.
Yep.
And then I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook it's either Sophie Carr Photo or Sophie Carr Photography. But if you type my name in, you should find me, especially if you put the word Iceland in, because most of my work is Iceland. I've got a few other galleries on my website of non-Icelandic work, including my recent Scotland trip. I've got a couple of really nice shots from that. But yeah, so if you want to interact with me, Twitter's probably the best place, because that's where I'm most active. But I post the odd bits and pieces on Facebook and Instagram too.
Fantastic, thanks.
Twitter, I'm on it all. Like as soon as I'm off work, I'm on Twitter.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening, because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnephotography.com. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.